Special FBI Agent Wimberly W. Baker was born in Metropolis, Illinois in January 1910. He attended the University of Arizona from 1928 to 1930 and later, in 1937, he began his training as an FBI special agent. Upon completion of this training, he was assigned to active duty in Kansas City, Missouri. Year of crimes up to 1937. Glen J. Applegate, a career criminal from Ohio, was in a New York prison when he managed to escape by falsely claiming he was British and had entered the United States illegally. Authorities released him, dropped a pending Pennsylvania robbery charge, and deported him to England, where he attacked an American, stole his passport and identity, and used it to hire on as a crewman on a U.S.-bound freighter. Once back in the United States, Applegate began associating with Robert J. Suhay, whom he had met in prison. Suhay, also a convicted robber, was out on parole. In April 1932, Suhay was sentenced in New York to a term of imprisonment of from 6 to 12 years for attempted robbery in the second degree, and he was paroled in March 1936. In December 1930, Applegate was sentenced in the same state to a term of from 5 to 10 years for robbery in the second degree, and he was paroled in November 1936. The paroles were forfeited on April 9 and June 12, 1937, respectively. Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate became acquainted in prison, and they associated together in New York City after being paroled. On the morning of March 12, 1937, Applegate intrigued a salesman of Buick automobiles to drive him to 64 Riverside Drive on the pretext that he was in the market to purchase an automobile and desired a demonstration. When they reached the address, appellant Applegate induced the salesman to accompany him to his room on the third floor. Suhay was in the room. Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate immediately drew guns on the salesman, told him it was a stick-up, tied his wrists and elbows behind him, gagged and bound him around the face and neck, removed his shoes and bound his ankles to the base of the chair, and told him they wanted his automobile. They took his driver's license, his Legion card, and the keys to the automobile and left. The automobile was gone when the salesman freed himself and went downstairs. About 3 hours later, Applegate, Suhay, and others robbed a bank in Katona, New York, of more than $18,000. After a cross-country flight, Applegate and Suhay wound up in Kansas City, Mo, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation on their trail. FBI agents got a tip that one of the men would receive mail sent general delivery to the U.S. Post Office in downtown Topeka under an assumed name. Special Agents Roy Martin, James Farland, and Wimberly Wayne Baker spent 4 days staking out the post office until April 16, 1937. The agents had been in the U.S. Post Office at Topeka, Kansas, when a man they identified as Alfred Power entered. As Special Agent Baker attempted to arrest the man, Suhay began firing upon the agent. After the initial rounds, both of the robbers participated in the gunfire, which was returned by the agent who had come to Agent Baker's assistance. When Applegate and Suhay arrived in the post office lobby, Baker was watching the general delivery window, while Martin was near the building's Kansas Avenue doors. Farland was out to lunch. While Applegate lingered elsewhere, Suhay went to general delivery window and asked for mail in the name of Rudolph Brinker. One letter included a newspaper clipping that said he and Applegate were wanted for bank robbery. Suhay walked to a nearby table. About 5 minutes later, Applegate went to the window and called Fail under the name of Louis Moore, which was the recipient's name to which the FBI had been tipped. When the postal clerk flashed a prearranged signal, FBI agent Baker approached Applegate and attempted to arrest him, not realizing Suhay was approaching. Suhay shot the FBI agent, who managed to return fire. Applegate also drew his gun and fired at Baker, who fell wounded and died the following day. The fugitives fled, firing as they ran. At least 15 shots were fired inside the post office, and 2 bystanders were wounded. Martin joins the pursuit, shooting at the men's getaway car, wounding Suhay in the left wrist. Applegate and Suhay fled north, wrecking their car near Sabetha, where they commandeered a car from a physician who treated Suhay's wound. The duo eventually were captured in Plattsmouth. Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate were charged by indictment with the murder of Wimberly Wayne Baker in the post office building at Topeka, Cannon. Submitting the case to the jury, the court instructed on murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree. And the jury was appropriately advised that in the event Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate were found guilty of murder in the first degree, the verdict could be qualified by adding thereto the words "without capital punishment." Separate verdicts were returned finding them guilty of murder in that degree. But the qualification was not added and sentences of death followed. Both Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate were sentenced to die by hanging. One contention remains. It presents the sufficiency of the evidence to support the verdict. It is argued that the evidence fails to show deliberation, premeditation, and malice aforethought. That instead it affirmatively shows that Baker suddenly appeared on the scene with a drawn gun. That Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate were taken completely by surprise, and that they acted upon the impulse of the moment. On the contrary, the evidence with its reasonable inferences was sufficient to warrant the jury in finding that the Robert J. Suhay and Glen J. Applegate had violated their respective paroles from prison in New York, and were subject to apprehension for return to complete their sentences. That they had committed the several crimes in that state on March 12th, and were subject to arrest and return for prosecution. That they mutually intended and agreed to resist arrest, and if necessary to take the life of any officer who sought to arrest them rather than to submit to arrest and be returned. And that in the fulfillment of that intention they deliberately, premeditatedly, and with malice aforethought shot the deceased when he undertook to arrest one of them. Homicide committed in such circumstances constitutes murder in the first degree. The judgment is affirmed. The day fixed for the execution having passed, the cause is remanded with directions that the trial court cause appellants to be brought before it, and that it then fix a day for the execution of the judgment and sentence. Applegate and Suhay were hanged on August 12, 1938 at the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. A plaque now hangs on the bullet-scarred wall of the post office commemorating Special Agent Baker and others lost in the line of duty. Thank you for watching Death Row.